I want to dive into a conversation around like masculinity. I think it's important to define like what that means. I think as your son, I've learned a lot of what masculinity means from you, and would love to be able to hear, just because I think you have a unique experience in that. Your dad was absent. My father, your dad was absent, and you're raised by your grandfather, who was born 19
Early
early
1911.
1911, right? But then raised a son just like, despite not having that direct, your father being able to raise you,
Right.
and then raised me in a time where masculinity was much different for me than it did for your grandfather. And so it's interesting in what that's looked like for you, or how you define masculinity, and kind of like how your upbringing impacted how you see the world and how the world may see you.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So lived with my grandparents from the time I was 5, and my grandfather was a huge man, like 6'4", 250, and hands the size of like frying pans. I mean, just big dude, really deep voice. And so I grew up most of my life in fear of my grandfather.
Yeah.
And, he was all about hard work. He was strength, and but then I always saw him give back. Like he would, even at his age, in his mid-60s when he first started caring for me, weekly we'd go and deliver meals. And so I saw that side of him that helped to inform me about what things are important. So I needed to make sure I worked hard. I needed to make sure I was strong. I needed to make sure I get back. So it's foundationally kind of set the table for me in terms of what a man looks like. And I never heard him really raise his voice to my grandmother. He was a protector, a provider, that type of thing. So those things, stuck for me that were important. Now, how that's evolved is I know that, until later on in his life, he never told me he loved me. Like, people had to tell me how much my grandfather loved me. But I never knew that until, maybe the last 5 years of his life. And we had deeper conversations. So, by then, you were born. And so I know I missed that, the emotional piece of it. Never saw him cry. So that kind of informed me, men don't cry. Like, men don't show feeling like that, right? And, that's not his fault, but it's damaging, right? Because, we're human. And so I remember, it was a couple 5 years ago or so, you and I had a conversation, and I divulged to you I was being very vulnerable with you and telling you some of the mistakes I made in life, and how, I regretted the mistakes, but in some ways I didn't, because it helped me learn more about myself. And it allowed you to breathe. You were like, oh my God, because I think up to a certain point, you thought that I was, perfect, no flaws in terms of manhood and that type of thing. And it allowed you to be comfortable in your skin and realize you didn't have to be perfect. Yeah. And actually by me allowing that for you, you allowed that for me as well. I mean, it was a flywheel effect, right? It just helps the relationship as a whole. And, I don't know what manhood is. I know what it is to be a human being. I do realize that, it's old habits are hard to break. I still believe in being, in showing up in my strength. But I realize showing up in my strength, sometimes I'm vulnerable with those who I most care about, right? I've got relationships with 3 or 4 individuals, dudes who I've known for, decades, 30 years. And seeing those relationships evolve. The other day I was talking to one of my closest, your Uncle Steve, and he said, man, we don't tell each other we love each other. And jokingly, I was like, dude, You know what I'm saying? But I understand.
Your little scrawny.
Yeah,
ass.
I'm like, look, man, I'm going to give you a 2-piece, for that. And so, but I knew exactly what he meant because, we've lived more life than we've got left probably. And so at any moment, any time, we may not be around. What a shame that would be if we don't express that to each other every time we get opportunity.
Yeah.
And so being more intentional about that, for those you care about, being able to show strength, but also vulnerability, and being able to be sensitive when you need to be sensitive about things. Because again, we're human.
Yeah.
Is what it's all about. Now, I can respect others' views of masculinity for whatever it is for them, but still know that for me these things ring true, and then you're going to take that whatever you observe for me, and then you're going to develop your own form of what that is for yourself, and then ultimately whenever you have a family.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your vulnerability. I think one of the things that was salient for me was around, you said the 3 things that he's basically instilled in you. You saw from him were work hard, be strong, give back, and those are 3 things I saw from you, right? Like you worked hard as hell. You were traveling all the time, and not even necessarily working towards your career, but like we lived from like when I was like 9. You were going back and forth between Charlotte and Spartanburg, trying to make you were present at every single game I played in college. You were all 57 games. You were, with the exception of 1, you were present for, right? And like that effort, like was like noticed, right? Like that's something that no matter what anybody, when anybody asks like, or about, hey, what was it like growing up? Like, my parents were split up or divorced, but like both of my parents raised me. Like you were present in everything that I did, and like that was evident. Strong. Like I never questioned your strength. I don't think I've seen you cry. I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I've seen you cry. And like they were either really heavy moments in terms of just like I tell you something that I wasn't expecting to tell you, or something that might harm you. Or hurt you in some way, or I'm really proud of you. Those are like the moments that I've seen you cry. And then lastly, you're talking about like work. Back to being strong. I think that physically, I've always seen you're a big dude, so I've always felt like the need to be physically strong. But I think being mentally tough and like emotionally strong is something that I felt like I've seen from you in terms of being able to endure and just like keep going. And I think what that looked like for me has ended up being like, yeah, I'm being strong by being vulnerable and open. Like I think that the way that my strength presents itself looks different, right? Because I'm a lot more of an emotional feeler. I wear my heart on my sleeve.
Yeah.
But like it takes a lot of strength and courage to do that. Like there's not a lot of you don't get a lot of reward for, especially as a man or a black man, for being vulnerable. Your masculinity gets questioned.
Well, question masculinity.
Question your sexuality gets questioned. Right, like your blackness may get questioned, right? Because you're able to.
Well, that's fear,
that.
man. That's fear, and that's and I think I was never shown that.
Yeah.
To be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And so, oftentimes we build these facades based on our own issues or the moments that we don't talk about with other people, right? Because we got to build these things up to protect ourselves, whatever we're protecting.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I did that most of my life, right? So you have some type of trauma, and it reinforces that which you consider to be strong, right? And so that's just what you do. If you're able to somehow show some vulnerability, by expressing yourself a certain way, showing up a certain way, but still be strong enough to know when people may be trying to use that vulnerability against you, that's the strength. That's where the strength comes in. Like you can be vulnerable and still be strong and like, no, you're not gonna take advantage of me. Yeah. Like I may be vulnerable, but you're not gonna walk over me. Mm-hmm. And that's the strength. Yeah. And so that's a skill that I'm not sure a lot of folks develop. I know I didn't think about those things earlier, particularly at your age. Never.
Yeah.
And I think what and I'll get back to you. I'm sorry to pontificating, but what I want to make sure happens is that society changes all the time, right? Your own view of masculinity can evolve, but the core things that you know to be true and true for yourself and serve you well, that doesn't have to change with society.
Never.
It just doesn't. And it doesn't mean you don't respect people or what have you, wherever they are, but this is where you are. Mm-hmm. And if you can evolve as you see fit, then do that. I've never questioned your masculinity, no matter how vulnerable you show up. I think it's helped me to understand that that's okay. And I think that it's a good thing. I really think it's a great thing.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that we kind of talked about, like being vulnerable, and I'll have a question at the end of it, but I think one of the things I want to share is that I think if I talk to most men, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, etc., they see themselves as protectors and providers. Just so like society's made us. Mm-hmm. That's what we are, and that's what we want to do.
Right.
However that looks.
Yeah.
We have no problem trying to work hard. We believe we should work hard. We want to be strong.
Some people.
Well, yeah, most
some
of us.
People.
Some people.
Some people want to be famous.
Yeah, that was
they don't put the work in.
Exactly. And I think we're going back to like being an athlete, right? Like that Mamba mentality, right? Of just like being better than you were the day before. I think that's the essence of like the way that I kind of look at the world, and that's something that we are connected on. Yeah. Being strong, but then also giving back. Like that's something that I've realized, even with young kids love to be able to help one another.
Yeah. And
I wonder at what point that shifts and we feel like that isn't something that we can do, or I think it's part of that is like a work thing, right? Like if I want to make money, people are all, even if you go to the league, right? I want to be an NFL player, make it to the league. Everybody wants to go make it to the league because they want to be able to take care of their moms back at home, or take care of their friends, or take care of their homeboys, or take care of their cousins, and be able to give. And so I think that those are all natural parts of masculinity. I think another thing that I was thinking about was I still remember that conversation we had a couple years ago, or I don't necessarily remember exactly what was said, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and that relief or that freedom that I felt like I had in terms of being like, oh, bro, I ain't gotta be perfect no more. Like I don't have to be that person who doesn't make mistakes. I don't feel like I've made a lot of mistakes, and I haven't made, or if I've made mistakes, they weren't life-altering mistakes, which I'm grateful for. And because of that, like I've been able to learn from a lot of the mistakes of other people because they've been able to be vulnerable with me, or we've sat down and talked about like, hey, this person made this mistake. I'll never forget that ESPN article we read probably when I was like 10 around this person who made a mistake and like altered their entire career and making good choices. Not necessarily like don't make mistakes, but make sure you're making the right choices or choices that you can bounce back from.
One-way doors and two-way doors.
Yeah.
So,
but one of the things that I've realized in my life is when I've been vulnerable, most of the time people are receptive of that, and like I haven't been hurt much by people not accepting my vulnerability. I've also realized that once I have extended myself and I have been vulnerable with you, and I've realized that you don't have the capacity to hold that, that's made it really hard for me to ever be able to trust you again. And I don't know, like I'm still working on like.
Me specifically?
No.
You talk
me
about
generally, the ubiquitous you.
I
learned that word the other day. Shout out to Colleen for teaching me ubiquitous. Yeah,
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, scholar. I'm a scholar. But like,
sound like a flavor.
Yeah. It does sound nice. Ubiquitous. Yeah,
ubiquitous.
That's a good word. Word of the day. However, I think one of the things that I'm working on a lot is I've been blessed to have a lot of people around me who, and you've modeled this for me. You do what you say you're gonna do. Like that's one of the things that if you say you're gonna do something, you do it. And if you can't do it, you give me a legit reason, not an excuse of why like it couldn't happen. And I've realized I have a very low tolerance for people who either don't do what they say they're going to do, or have shown to me that you don't have the capacity to be able to hold space for me in the ways that I need that space to be held. And that's been a tough realization, because I feel like, what's the line between, hey, people deserve another chance, or people deserve to be able to like bounce back and grow from mistakes, and this is my boundary, and this is the way that this is why I'm holding the line. And so I'm curious for you, like, what if that's been your reality, and also what does that look like in your experience as someone who is less vulnerable? I would say less vulnerable than me, and like, how do you feel like that's shaped the way that you navigated the world?
Yeah, that's a lot there.
That's a very loaded question.
There. It's almost ubiquitous.
It's ubiquitous.
No, I think, first of all, the reason that I have made a point of, in most of my relationships, particularly with my kids, to do what I say I'm going to do, is because that's not what I experienced growing up with my biological father. Mm-hmm. So almost in that area of pain or trauma, I was able to then say, I'm not going to let this happen to other people. Like, I can't be that. I got to be different. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like to say it was, purely out of being a person of my word. It came out of my pain. And that's a strong place for something to be developed. And so that's why I've been that way. And I value that in others. I'm not always, I'm not batting 100 or 1,000 with that, but
You ain't batting 100 either.
No, I'm batting somewhere between 100 and 1,000. But I do more often than not. Particularly for my kids, man. If I tell you I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna do it. If I tell you I'm not gonna do it, I'm not gonna do it. And it may not be a reason that y'all, care to hear, but it's gonna be what it is. Yeah. And so that's been something I try to do. And I think that gives you some foundational elements in terms of how to define relationships. Now, everybody's not that way, for whatever reason. And I found that those relationships that I have that I'm not necessarily able to count on their word, then I define them. And I'm able to then cherry pick what I can get from that relationship versus relying on them totally. Yeah. Which is fine. As long as you understand that, you can have a productive relationship with someone. There's just not, y'all call them associates or whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. But they're just not necessarily people you're going to be able to say, you know what, I need this, and I'm going to count on this person. And I probably have, a handful of people I can do that with, which is all I need. Yeah. And so that's that. You were talking about other forms of masculinity. What else?
Yeah, I think it was more about, we just stop it, we good. The other question I think I wanted to also touch on was around, like, when you have to set those boundaries, like, how do you discern whether or not, like, where to put people in your life, right? Because I'm a very, like, if I'm riding for you, I got you. You got me no matter what, right? Yeah. And if I say I got you ever, like, I got you. Right. But also, if I don't got, like, but if you show me that you don't got me, I can very well, and this might be a Virgo thing. I'm learning more about astrology. I'm very easily just be like, hey, okay, that's what this is. Yeah. And not that I don't care about you or love you, but I know for myself that I just can't do that. Yeah. And so, just curious what that looks like for you.
Yeah. First of all, I'm not an equal opportunity type of dude. Like I have some core relationships I've built over the majority of my life, right? Yeah. And I picked up a few along the way. I'm not open for business for everybody to be close to me. You know what I mean? I'm just not.
I'm becoming less that way.
Yeah, I've been a very I got a core group of folks, man, who I can be myself around all the time and not be judged for it, and not take anything personally. Because first of all, that's that book you and I talked about is something everyone should read. And not taking things personally is number one on that list. But I'm not able to take
the 4 agreements.
Yeah, 4 agreements. I'm able to have interaction with my dudes, and it's just what it is. Right. And so I don't necessarily look for, other applicants.
Yeah.
When I was your age and I was developing those relationships, I think men in general, and I'll say this in general, as we age, we're less and less social.
Yeah.
And it becomes more and more challenging for us to develop relationships that aren't already developed.
Yeah.
And I've tried to fight that in some ways, but in reality, I'm good with that, and I don't know that it's something that's science as much as it's art, Miles. Like, you just kind of know people you vibe with.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in people who have, different experiences. I'm not just optically diverse, but experientially diverse people, and that really interests me. But I don't know that there's a science to it. I just know if it's not about not forgiving people, it's not about not having grace. It's about how you show up in my life and how I'm gonna show up in yours.
Yeah.
And there are gonna be limitations.
Yeah.
There just will be. And because I'm not the type of person that's like, oh, come on, come on. I'm just not that type of dude.
Yeah, that's real. Last thing on masculinity, and then I want to shift to our last topic. What time is it? About chance?
12:28.
Perfect timing. God, dang, man, I really should be a professional podcaster. The last thing I want to touch on, I think that it's important in terms of just me being vulnerable, is that the older I get, the more I'm exposed to working with young people and just people across difference, and just experiencing life as a man. Like, the more appreciation and gratitude I have, especially for your experience not being raised by your father, and like the hurt that or the pain that may have caused, and like you being able to show up in the ways that you shown up, not just physically for me, but like emotionally, and like, 'cause I know that was a really hard work, and that's not work that gets what's the word, appraised enough. You know what I'm saying? Like, people, you can't really quantify mental health, or you can't really quantify mental toughness. People don't get certificates for being mentally, like, going through trauma and overcoming it.
Right.
You know, like, that's just a personal thing or individual thing.
Right.
But like, I tell people all the time, like, my parents were the perfect parents for me, and like, you could not have been a better dad. I could not have had a better dad for me than you, and so wanted to make sure I gave you your flowers in that regard, just because it's important to let people know. But on top of that, like, that's allowed me to be the man that I am, and be able to be a man that's able to say, like, I made a mistake. I am sorry for what I've done, and I'm sorry for how my actions have impacted you. And I want to see how I can make up for whatever that mistake was, so that I can mend our relationship in all my relationships. I mean, I'm talking about with my 4-year-olds, with their parents, with my staff, with my friends, with my family, because I understand that life is short, and how important it is to be able to have meaningful relationships, or just not to have bad blood with people, you know, because we don't want to move around that way. But I appreciate you for modeling that for me. The last thing I want to talk about is like achievement and success. I'm about to pause the recording unless you have anything else you want to wrap up with masculinity.
Yeah, I think the last thing, man, you mentioned that it sounds like you want to make peace with people, which is cool, you know, but I would caution you that some people don't want peace, or don't know what peace is, and you can't chase that, right? It's like, if you try to show up in a way and it's genuinely out of love, and it's not received that way, you can have that one conversation. But after that, it's what it is, because you genuinely showed up out of love. This person doesn't want to give you grace, or doesn't want to accept it that way. It's going to be what it is, and it doesn't mean that you don't value them or you don't care for them or whatever. But at a certain point, and what makes interactions so wonderful and so frustrating and so fantastic and so terrible is that we're different.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And to realize and value people's differences no matter what is political or social, whatever it is just being human.
Yeah.
And so, show up with love. Realize it's not going to be received that way by everybody, and it's okay. It's just okay.
Yeah. And an area of growth for me is, and I think I've grown a lot over the last couple of years in this regard, is realizing that, one, it's okay not to be perfect. Two, what other people think genuinely does not matter, right? Like, there's a certain handful of people whose opinions actually matter. Our world right now is in a place where a lot of different people are able to comment on your lives that you'll never meet, or would never say those things to your face. And
And we'll tell you to pull up. And they don't want that.
They don't want no smoke.
They don't want no smoke.
They don't want no smoke, right?
They can hide behind that screen all day and say, pull up, pull up, pull up.
Right. And so, with that being said, I think it's really important to be able to know who you are, know why you do, have a purpose, right? Know why you do the things that you do, and being really intentional about how your interactions, your relationships with other people, because the world can make you think that things matter that don't really matter. And so, I appreciate you for sharing that. And thanks for pulling up on me in New Orleans, man.
That's all I do, man.
I know that could be a little costly to get down here to New Orleans. I appreciate you.
Can't take it with you, bro. Can't take it with you. You know what I mean?
Appreciate it.